Every few months, some British homeowners in the French countryside pack a bag and fly to Egypt. Not for the pyramids, not for the beaches. They're doing it because if they don't leave the European Union for a while, they could be breaking the law in the country where they own a house. Sounds absurd, but it's real, and it affects potentially up to 200,000 British households who own a second home in France, plus everyone who lives there full-time. And if you're American, Canadian or Australian, don't switch off yet. This exact same rule applies to you too. It's not a British-only problem, it's a non-EU problem. If you own property in France or you're thinking about it, this video will save you a very expensive mistake. Here's the rule almost nobody explains clearly enough. Since Brexit, British citizens and any non-EU nationals are treated like any other visitor in the Schengen area. That means a maximum of 90 days within any rolling 180-day period. Not 90 days per year. 90 days within any 180-day window, calculated backwards from any given day. That distinction is exactly what trips people up. Let's make it concrete. Say you arrive in France on the 1st of March and leave on the 30th of April. That's 61 days. If you come back on the 1st of July, the system looks back 180 days from that date and adds up everything you've spent in the Schengen area during that window. And here's what changed recently. Since April 2026, a new system called the EES, the Entry/Exit System, automatically records every single crossing at the border. There's no more relying on a passport stamp someone might have missed. One day over the limit now triggers an automatic fine, typically between 500 and 1,000 euros, and can mean a ban on re-entering Schengen for 1 to 3 years, logged directly into the European SIS database. This isn't a theoretical risk anymore. It's tracked automatically, every time. Here's the part that really surprises people. A British person who owns a €500,000 cottage in Provence has exactly the same 90-day allowance as a backpacker passing through on a 2-week trip. Buying a home in France does not buy you the right to stay in France. And it's not that nobody tried to fix this. Back in December 2023, French MPs actually voted through an amendment that would have automatically granted long stay rights to British second homeowners. For a moment, it looked like the problem was solved. Then, in January 2024, France's Constitutional Council struck the whole thing down. Not because lawmakers disagreed with the idea, but on a technicality, they ruled the amendment wasn't sufficiently connected to the immigration bill it was attached to. One French lawmaker later described the current situation as unnecessarily complex and heavy, and even hinted it might be a bit of quiet post-Brexit payback. Since then, MPs and senators keep relaunching proposals to fix it properly. None of them have passed yet. So if you've seen headlines claiming British owners won the right to 6 months without a visa, that's almost always people reporting on that December 2023 vote without mentioning it got cancelled a month later. As of right now, the rule hasn't changed. No carve-out exists. Nothing is currently in force. That's why some owners end up doing exactly what we described at the start. Leaving the Schengen area entirely, sometimes to a country like Egypt, purely to legally reset their 90-day clock so they can come back and actually use the home they've paid for. Now here's something that trips people up even more, and it's rarely explained well. The Schengen 90/180 rule and French tax residency are two completely separate systems, governed by different laws, and passing one test does not automatically mean you pass the other. French tax residency generally kicks in if you spend more than 183 days a year in France. So if you're carefully staying under 90 days for Schengen purposes, you might assume you're automatically safe on the tax side too. Not necessarily true. French tax law also looks at where your main home is, where your family lives, and where the centre of your economic interest sits. Where your salary or pension actually gets paid, where your main bank accounts and investments sit, where your family lives day to day. Even someone who spends fewer than 183 days in France in a given year can still be classified as a French tax resident if these other criteria point to France. The 183-day count is a threshold that guarantees residency if you cross it. It is not a safe harbour that protects you just because you stayed under it. In short, staying under 90 days keeps you legal with immigration. It does not automatically keep you off the French tax authorities' radar. Two different battles, two different sets of rules. This problem isn't spread evenly. It hits hardest in the regions where British buyers have concentrated for decades. the Dordogne and the Lot, an area the British press nicknamed Dordogneshire, home to a British community that's been building there for over 30 years. If you own there or you're looking to buy there, this rule is central to how you'll actually be able to use the property, not a footnote. It also matters at the higher end of the market, Provence and the Côte d'Azur, where British buyers with bigger budgets, often €500,000 and up, are drawn by the light and the lifestyle. The price tag doesn't buy an exemption there either. There's another financial hurdle that catches people out before they even get to the visa question: getting a mortgage. French banks routinely ask non-resident buyers for a deposit of 20 to 30% of the purchase price, sometimes 30 to 40% if you're coming from outside the EU. On top of that, most banks apply a discount of 10 to 20% to your income if it's paid in pounds rather than euros to protect themselves against currency swings, which effectively shrinks your borrowing power on paper. Loan terms are also shorter, typically capped at 20 years for non-residents, compared with 25 for French residents, and the interest rate itself usually runs 0.10 to 0.40 points higher. The standard French loan guarantee scheme, Crédit Logement, generally won't touch a non-resident file at all. None of this makes buying impossible. Plenty of British buyers do get financing, but budgeting with UK-style assumptions about deposits and terms will catch you out. So what's the real fix for the visa side? The long-stay visitor visa. You'll see it referred to as the VLS-T or VLS-TS, depending on the exact duration you request. It covers stays from a few months up to a year. You apply at the French consulate in London before you travel, and processing typically takes 4 to 6 weeks. Here's what changed recently and matters for your budget. Since the 1st of May 2026, the validation tax on this visa rose to €300, up from €200 previously, on top of the standard consular fee. You'll also need private health insurance covering the full length of your stay. If you're of UK state retirement age, you may be entitled to an S1 form, which effectively lets French healthcare bill the UK for your care. But S1 registration in France takes time to process, so most people still take out a private policy for at least the first 6 months to a year while that goes through. It's not automatic, and it's not instant. You need to apply in advance with the right paperwork, and once you arrive, you generally have to validate the visa online within 3 months, or your stay becomes irregular. Worth flagging before we go further, ETIAS, the EU's new travel authorization system, is expected to launch in the final quarter of 2026. It won't change the 90/180 rule itself, but it adds another layer of registration for non-EU travellers entering the Schengen area. One more thing to sort out on top of everything else if you're managing property here long term, and it's not just about the years you own it. Selling eventually has its own post-Brexit twist. Non-resident sellers pay a 19% withholding tax on the capital gain, plus social charges that were recently pushed up to 17.2% as part of the 2026 Social Security Financing Law. There is a bit of relief here. If you're still affiliated with UK Social Security and not part of the French mandatory scheme, you may be exempt from most of that social charge, leaving only a 7.5% solidarity levy instead of the full amount. But you have to actually meet those conditions and prove it. On top of that, since Brexit reinstated the requirement, any UK seller selling above €150,000 has to appoint an accredited tax representative to handle the transaction. Another layer of paperwork and another cost that residents of France don't have to deal with at all. If you already own property in France, or you're seriously considering it, drop a comment with which region you're looking at. Dordogne, Provence, somewhere else entirely. It genuinely shapes what we cover next. The real cost breakdown of the long-stay visa process, how the French tax authority actually decides where your centre of economic interest is, and which regions are quietly becoming better value than the obvious ones. Subscribe if you don't want to miss it.